Last week we talked about the southern states and their economic focus on agriculture, specifically cash crops like cotton and the development of the cotton gin, which led to an increased demand for enslaved labor. This week, we're going to focus on the northern states and their focus on manufacturing. So I've coined it the Industrialized North. So let's talk about this movement in northern states called the Industrial Revolution. And unlike the American Revolution, there were no battles, there were no fixed dates for the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a long, slow process that changed the way that goods were produced. Okay, so it's not battles, but it's a process that changed the way that goods were produced. It changed the production, the means of production. And so where did this Industrial Revolution begin? It began in England in the late 18th century, so the late 1700s. It was meant to be kept a secret from other countries, but it spread to the United States, mainly the North, after the War of 1812, which we kind of talked about how that war sparked the Industrial Revolution as the United States became more independent economically. So the Industrial Revolution started in England, but quickly spread to the United States. How did the Industrial Revolution change production of goods in the United States? Well, there are four main ways. Each of them you need to know. The first way, the advent of interchangeable parts. The shift from craft work to factory work. The use of new power sources. And improvements in technology. These four things changed the way that goods were produced during the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to talk about each of these ways in a moment. The Industrial Revolution began with the textile industry. And textile is cloth or woven fabric. So it started in the textile industry, but quickly spread to the production of other goods throughout the North. Specifically in the New England states, where the geography lent itself to more manufacturing, as we talked about when we talked about the 13 colonies, right? They had more rocky soil, so instead of farming, they focused on manufacturing of goods, and they had rivers and abundant natural resources that can be used in these factories. But it began with textiles. So the advent of interchangeable parts. So what does interchangeable parts mean? And this is actually something that's common today, but during the Industrial Revolution, it was something that was first developed. And it was invented by Eli Whitney. Yes, it's the same Eli Whitney that created the cotton gin that really changed the southern economy. But what interchangeable parts are is they are parts of a manufactured product, such as furniture, machines, and tools that were made to be identical. All right, so they were parts that were made to be identical. The reason for that is they could be easily replaced when broken. And so Eli Whitney initially created the interchangeable parts for guns. as the diagram shows. So each part was could be swapped in when broken. So there was an identical part that if this broke, it could be replaced. Instead of what it used to be like, you would have to make the whole gun over again, or the machine over again, or the furniture over again, where the interchangeable parts allowed you to quickly replace any broken pieces. This led to the start of mass production. And mass production means to make in large amounts, usually by machinery. So because parts are now identical, it is easier and quicker to produce. It's more efficient. And so we have more mass production of these manufactured products like furniture, machines, and tools because the parts are identical, they're easy to replace, and you can do them quickly. All right, so that was reason number one for the, the change due to the Industrial Revolution was the interchangeable parts. The next kind of change that we see in mainly the North is a shift from craft work to factory work. Craft work is work done in the home, usually by hand. Okay, well, factory work is a big difference. And so before we see things like clothes were made in the home by hand. Now, due to the Industrial Revolution, clothes were made by machines in factories. And so because of this change, manufactured products like clothes can be done quicker, easier, cheaper, and more efficient than they were before when it was in the home, kind of a slower process. But how did this start? How did we start to see this shift from craft work in the home to factory work? And so the beginning was a man named Samuel Slater, a British textile worker, set up a textile factory in Rhode Island in 1790. And what's interesting about him was at the time, Great Britain didn't allow textile workers to immigrate to other countries, specifically the United States. They were trying to keep the secrets. So when Samuel Slater did immigrate to the United States, there were no drawings of the production system in Great Britain. There were no diagrams. Everything he did came from memory of his time in the textile factories. All right, so Samuel Slater, and this is important to know, he created the first profitable water-powered textile mill in the United States. So the key is there, profitable, right? He made money, water-powered textile mill. He used something called the spinning frames, and the picture is the picture on the top of the screen is a spinning frame. So it's a machine that could easily spin fabric. And some people actually call it the spinning jenny as well. And what he would do is he hired entire families, men, women, and children, to work in the mill. And he created these company villages in which he would provide housing. There would be shops, and this is where the the mill workers would live in this company village, and they would reinvest the money into the shops which he owned. So it's kind of like this revolving of his own money. And so here's a diagram of Samuel Slater's mill, the first one, again, on the river, water-powered textile mill. Okay, and part of this shift from craft work to factory work also included a man by the name of Francis Cabot Lowell. And what Francis Cabot Lowell did is he created this Lowell system. And the Lowell system is the idea of manufacturing cotton cloth from raw cotton to finished cloth under one roof. So the whole process was developed and manufactured and produced under one roof. So it went from the raw cotton to the cloth in one factory. Instead of the process being in different places, it's in one location. It was also, we see the use of a mechanized loom. So it was a machine for weaving cloth. And then we have the Lowell Mill girls. And these are hired young single women, the ages of 15 to 35. And he and his partners created a mill community that had strict rules to follow. And it was very similar to what we saw with Samuel Slater, in the fact that these young women would leave home, usually from the countryside, and to live under these strict rules where they had to attend church and they had to, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit. And they worked 80 hours a week and made about $2 to $4 per week. Okay. And part of this, this community is you would see, there would be buildings with many shared bedrooms. There would be a kitchen. Again, there's rules, but the work was very difficult. And we're actually going to read a primary source about a personal experience from one of these women. And they worked for a few years, earned money for their family, and then they usually worked until they were married. Actually, they did work until they were married. And so here's one of the looms I was talking about. You see, they're more mechanical, almost like they are a machine. Really different from a at-home type of system. It was to mass produce, quick. And so here is what I was talking about a textile mill would look like. It'd be on the river, usually a river, some type of water system that would power the factory, power the machines. And then if you look within the diagram itself, you see that there is a process from that raw cotton to the final product that would be sold at the market. And so here's some more pictures of this was an advertisement. 75 young women from 15 to 35 years of age wanted to work in the cotton mills. And so it's intriguing. They will be paid $1 per week and board, which means housing. And you must work for at least 1 year. Here's some pictures of the actual young women that participated in these type of factories. But this was a very significant time. But the Lowell system, the idea that a factory produced the entire product from start to finish, really revolutionized manufacturing in the United States and made it more modernized, kind of like what we see today. So we talked about two ways of how the Industrial Revolution changed the production of goods in the United States. We talked about the advent of the interchangeable parts. And we talked about the shift from craft work to factory work. The third way, new power sources. And so we talked about one of these already, water power, the use of rivers and other waterways to power the factory and the machines within it. And this was made possible because of the many fast-moving rivers in the North. Again, specifically the New England states, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, Pennsylvania in some areas, New York. But there was a second power source that was developed, and that was steam power. And so what steam power would do is it would use hot steam from boiling water to drive a piston or pistons back and forth, which would create the energy and the power needed. The one thing that steam power did do is it allowed for factories to be located anywhere. It didn't necessarily need to rely on being next to a river. And steam power was actually a more reliable source of energy and could more easily power large machines. And the reason it was more reliable is, think about rivers. Okay, rivers freeze in the cold winter. If there's a drought, rivers can dry up. Okay, so steam was more reliable. They also had wind power back then, but sometimes the wind just doesn't blow and create the energy needed. Okay, so again, we have the advent of interchangeable parts, the shift from craft work to factory work, and now new power sources. The fourth and final kind of change in production was improvements in technology during the Industrial Revolution. So we see things like the spinning frame, which mentioned earlier in this video. All metal tools and machines. These all metal tools and machines were much more reliable than wooden tools that were easily broken. The steam engine, which I just talked about, the McCormick reaper, and the combine harvester. These two illustrations are of the McCormick reaper. Now, who do you think benefited from these improvements in technology? If you said the South, you are correct. They benefited the South in their agricultural focus. And it made it faster and easier to gather crops. So if you see both of the McCormick reaper, you see it's a tool, it's a machine that is used to gather crops much faster and much easier than by hand. These improvements in technology led to a higher level of output. Again, it relied less on human power and more on machine power. And when that happens, there is a higher level of output, which business owners at the time, factory owners, that was their motivation. Higher level of output means more products that can be sold at market, which means higher profit. And again, if you're a business owner, that is your focus, making the most money possible, which we'll talk about the effects of the Industrial Revolution, but making the most money possible also meant not giving the best working conditions and wages to workers. But we'll talk more about that in our next lesson.